Coffee, Cows and Crops is produced by the Peace Country Beef and Forage Association and hosted by Extension Coordinator Johanna Murray. On this podcast, we discuss management practices and research results with scientists, ranchers, researchers, and farmers. We strive to share innovative information and farming practices supported by sound science and practical wisdom. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get learning. Hi everybody, thank you for joining us for today's episode of Coffee, Cows, and Crops. Today I'm talking to Adam Norris and Rhonda Clarke-Gauthier from the Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance about their Livestock Water Crossing project. So before we get right into the project itself, can I get you guys to introduce the MPWA and what you do?
Okay, so the MPWA has been around since 2011, and we were established to be a multi-stakeholder group that looks at water quality and quantity and things that we do on the landscape that affect water quality and quantity. Our goals are to look at policy, look at projects, look at planning opportunities to help maintain water quality or improve water quality. So our watershed, it covers both the Slave River up north as well as the Peace River. So it covers about 30% of the province of Alberta geographically.
Wow.
So it's a very huge watershed with a lot of water that goes through it. And so our work involves looking at source water protection planning, riparian areas and making sure that those work well, looking at wetland and wetland loss, looking at non-saline groundwater, water quality and quantity and the availability to people and industry and the landscape. So just making sure that there is water there. We're run by a board of directors, and that encompasses 21 different seats that cover multi-stakeholder groups. So government, industry, not-for-profit organizations, and First Nation and Métis settlements. So it's a wide variety of individuals that with opinions who sit around the table. And so because we work on consensus decision making, we tend to take a while to get to where we've got to go. But we know that when we get there, it's a good option because everybody's had to come to some type of agreement to move forward.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I guess, so I get to come in once the board and Rhonda have done the hard work of setting the direction. Generally, then I'm tasked with implementing that in some way. And as mentioned, there's a lot of planning and policy, but we also like to see that go out in the form of demonstration sites or projects to evaluate the effectiveness of management practices, right? It doesn't make any sense just to have policies that can't be implemented. So a lot of the project work we do is to really proof of concept or work with partners to help spread those type of management practices we want to see out there to improve that water quality and water quantity across the watershed. And so, for instance, today I believe we're going to be talking mostly about the Improve Livestock Crossing project. This one obviously deals with a lot of water quality issues, but also, and people don't realize this, a lot of water quantity issues because it's really about flood and drought resiliency. And because we're doing things with crossings that do that, we were able to access funding through the Watershed Restoration and Resiliency Program for this type of work.
Yeah, well, clean water is so important. And I'm really interested to hear more about the livestock water crossings because we talk a lot about how valuable clean water is to the livestock production just because you can measure that in pounds of gain on your yearlings and on your calves. So I'm interested to hear more about this project.
For sure. I mean, the other thing too, we find, there's sort of the 2 points. There's the producer's land where you're working with them. They have direct benefits. As you mentioned, with livestock, it's very easy to measure. Cropping is a bit more tricky, but it can be done. But there's also the ease of access. Some of these guys have, they've gone from having to drive their livestock, almost 2 miles around to, it's just 100 meters over the creek now because there's a proper crossing in place, right? or
Right.
the hassle of not having to pull livestock that are stuck in mud at the bottom of a gully trying to get them out, right? Like nobody wants to do that. So that's been good. But and from us, so we try to make sure there's the benefit to the producer, but also to the broader watershed. So it's great that this crossing helps the producer, but really we're very interested in what does it do for water quality and quantity over the whole watershed. And that's when we get to have the chance to look downstream. Can we do something that reduces the risk of flooding or drought for the next guy, the next gal, the next producer, the next town, whoever downstream that's going to be using that water. So,
and that's why it's so important with most of our projects to have a multitude of partners working together to do the work. And that's just so key in what we're doing, because we know that what one person does continues to do a ripple effect in it. So if we get all those people together to find a solution, it makes it much better.
Yeah, and we've been very lucky, right? We've had great partners that come together and do this work. This isn't something, we happen to be the lead on this project and on several projects, but there's always a group that comes together. And I think, as Rhonda mentioned, that's part of the strength of it. It's not just us saying this is the way it should be in the watershed, but a lot of different organizations coming together and saying, yeah, this is a good idea. Let's get this out there. Let's make this happen. So that's really where our effectiveness comes from.
Definitely. Yeah, that's cool. Was there anything that really surprised you as you started to work through like installing this water crossings as you worked kind of through the project?
I guess one of them, when we started this project, we budgeted for 2 crossings because we thought they're going to be very expensive, trying to span creeks. We are actually pleased we're installing I should be able to count this up better, 6th one right now. So 6th instead of 2. And there's a couple of things that come into that. You can scavenge, and we have a lot of partners, and they can bring in different things. And most producers are pretty, handy and thrifty, and they're willing to, work, right, and make things happen. So, okay, well, we need this part. Do you know anyone? They might know someone, and so we've been able to salvage materials. They do some of the work with their equipment, and that's really made this happen. And their willingness to adapt and be flexible and say, yeah, let's try this. This is something better for the watershed. So there's a lot of kudos that go to the producers for their adaptability, I guess is what it is.
Awesome. Yeah. Have there been any surprising challenges, I guess, making individual sites work within the broader watershed plan or that sort of thing as you've moved through this project?
I think there hasn't been too many challenges in terms of seeing the connect to the overall watershed health. That's been pretty clear. You go to a site and you can see, well, obviously if there are livestock going through this water, you're getting fecal matter in there, you're stirring up sediment, you're losing riparian vegetation, you're destabilizing the bank, go down the list. We know those effects. So if they're not in there, we know it's good. We also know for producers, as we mentioned, right, it's time consuming. It's potentially they're losing livestock, they're losing gains on their livestock. That's not good. It was a bit surprising to see how helpful this was for some croppers. So we've actually put in some structures for croppers. And, again, it's the same thing. If you have to take big equipment on a busy highway and go around 3 miles instead of going across, a lot of them were trying to get through these ephemeral draws just because of safety issues, whatever, right? And so with that crossing in, there's a lot more resiliency in that water course. It's doing what it is, storing water, releasing water, that sort of thing. And these guys aren't having to go all the way around. So that's been good.
Right.
Those have been some really pleasant surprises. And I think the biggest challenge we have, and it's still coming, and every site and every producer is different, is, they're cows, right? How do you get them to go across? And it takes a lot of coaxing, right? And some of them are, everyone has a bit of a different approach, but often it's a lot of, get the lead cow and drive from behind and get oats. But cows are, well, I'm not a producer, but some of the livestock seem to be fickle, right? You get them to go across sometimes and other times they don't. So some of the guys are still playing with that. How does this work best, right? But so far, success has been pretty good, but it's just sort of, I think that'll be something we continue to see a lot of discussion about. What's the best way to actually train livestock to go across these things?
Definitely.
I think some of the other challenge that comes the last few years with excessive rain and really high water levels. People have been able to use some of those crossing areas before and not had a problem. But with all the washouts and the movement and the banks being eroded to such an extent, it's just not feasible anymore. So I think the conversation is something that can come easier now, knowing the destruction that's happened in the last couple of years. So how do we better get people or livestock and equipment and things across those creeks at an ease without losing anything, right? So
Yeah.
I think that the excessive water of the last couple of years have had some challenge to how we've had to approach some things, and perhaps in some cases the materials that we could use to do that. So.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and there definitely have been some crossings, where when that water comes up, all of a sudden you're seeing the water push against it or backing up logs, and you think, oh, well, it's good to see they're all stable, right? We've had the highest flows in the last couple of years, and things are where they're supposed to be, and so that's encouraging. It's sort of like a stress test, right? We'll take a deluge of rain and see if it survives, and it did. So, yeah.
That is very good. Adjacent to that, is there anything you're doing differently now compared to when you started the project, like installation tips or materials you use or how you plan the crossing, any of that sort of stuff?
No, not really. It hasn't changed too much. And again, I said it like it's very site specific. Yet every producer, every landowner, whatever, they have different resources available. It is oil country, so a lot of our materials are salvaged oil field materials, which make a lot cheaper, right? And if someone happens to have a welder and can weld, that cuts down the cost more, right? So it generally tends to be, oil field drilling pipe as pilings, welded to some I-beams or directly to a rig mat that we've salvaged, and then putting railings on that. How that's tied into their management with fencing or chutes, that always varies a bit, but otherwise, we really focus on going above the water mark. We don't need a water act approval. We're above the bend shores, and we're not going to be where there's, water washing it away. And then also protecting that riparian zone that's so important. So we go there, and then we use these materials to build something very stable, and then just build up a ramp to it, so that it's smooth and it's not going to be a bit of an obstacle for the livestock to cross. But that's sort of been the procedure from the beginning, and it's worked out quite well. So we've been happy with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do want to backtrack just a little bit here to your board and the decision-making process and stuff. How did you get started with the Livestock Crossings project? How did that idea first start?
We, as a board, when we first got organized, one of our first things that we did was a state of the watershed report on, what sort of things are happening in the watershed, what water do we have, what water do we have in the wrong spot, right, at the wrong time, all those kinds of things, right? So we did the state of the watershed report, and we found a few issues of concern. And some of them, of course, one of them was having good water quality and quantity and availability away from the main stem, so away from the Peace River itself, so on the Wapiti River, and then you go into smaller tributaries, so like the Red Willow, the Beaver Lodge, in that area. That's kind of the tributaries we looked at. So when you start looking at that, we knew that was an issue of concern, and so then we started thinking, okay, what are some of the things we can do that we can help lead projects or give information or help resource items to make water quality and quantity better away from the main stem. And so when you start looking at the landscape, lots of industry happens in the Peace watershed, whether it's oil and gas or forestry or agriculture. There's just so many things that are going on out there. So try to find partners and people who are interested in moving forward in trying to protect water sources, as well as helping their own industry move forward. And so the livestock crossing was something that continued to come up for many people. It's like, well, whether you are the producer who's trying to get your livestock an easier way across, or whether you're the neighbor who's watching that going, oh, they've got their cattle in the creek again. Okay, well, everybody breathe, right? So it's trying to help, address those issues that continue to come to our table. And so once we were able to find some really willing and active partners, that became one of the goals. The other thing is, finding those resources. So funding often is a resource that is limiting factor for many people. And so when programs like the WRRP came forward, and we were able to tie into some of that to do some of this type of work, it's made sense to do it, do the demonstration sites, do those kinds of things where partners were willing to buy into. So for our board, it was a win because we knew it was an issue of concern, and then it was able to get on the ground and do some good work with that.
And and going back to all the planning that's been done, Rhonda mentioned the integrated watershed management plan. It also happens we've completed a watershed restoration plan, so it's a little more detailed and specific, and that's for the Red Willow watershed. And this is actually where a lot of the livestock crossings have happened, not all of them, but it makes it a lot easier to find funds and partners and everything if there's already a plan in place that identifies a specific need. Restoration and riparian zones and improvement of water quality are clearly identified in several plans that we're aware of for that area. So that it makes it a lot easier. And I know people find planning boring or sometimes useless, but right, if we can go in hand and say, look, these people sat down, they have identified this need. This is what we need to do. That's sort of essentially the pre-project work that has to happen. And so that's really helpful to have in place. And so that's why we're glad we have a couple of those and we can sort of work off of them and look for funds, as Rhonda mentioned, where it's possible, where they're partners, and then move forward on something.
For sure. And I think it's really neat how really practical this project is. Like, you can get your equipment across that ephemeral draw without having to go all the way around. You can move your cows from one side to another without worrying about them getting stuck or messing up the stream banks or any of that sort of thing. And it's just a very applicable project for a lot of people and fairly doable too. Like, you can use those rig mats and that sort of stuff to make fairly decent crossings and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the challenges again. I know with the one, so we use these rig mats that are generally 40 feet long. Generally, our span is then 35 feet or less, right? Because we have to establish above the bank. Sometimes it's shorter than that, but the challenge has been sometimes in the middle, it's quite bouncy, right? Because you've got a long span. And we did a couple of tours to show people these. And there was one really good suggestion about putting in guy wires. If you drove in posts on an angle at either end and then tried to use them sort of like a suspension bridge, that might stop it. We've never tried it, just cost, right? So it's one of those things out there when we have more people playing around this, maybe that's what it looks like though, in however many years people say, this is worth it. Let's put in an extra couple pipes and some guy lines and takes out some of that bounce in the middle, and maybe it's better for livestock. I don't know. So it'll be interesting to see what crossings look like in a few years. Peace Country is very creative and resourceful. I'm sure there'll be new variations soon.
Yes. And leading into that, if there are people who are listening to this who are like, well, that sounds like something I should put in. I have a creek that I can never get across. Where can they go to learn more about the project or get in contact with you guys about, how you've put stuff in the past and that sort of thing?
I guess the best place is our website, Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance.org. If you go to projects, under projects, there's a whole page, improved livestock crossing. There's also contact information. Our office number is 780-324-3355. Yes, that's McLennan, but as Rhonda said, it's Grand Cache to Fort Vermilion, Fort Chipewyan area, so we travel.
A lot of miles, I imagine.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, is there anything else you guys would like to add or put a plug in for?
Yeah, I guess the only other thing, some of these livestock crossings too, we really have to talk about the producers and what they're doing. A lot of them are taking time to fence out their riparian zone, adjust management, and I guess maybe we should go through the partners by name, but right now I'll mention cows and fish, just because I'm talking to producers about, here's the best way to graze a riparian area. It's not that it's never should be done, but there are definitely times you shouldn't be in there. There's a limit to the capacity there, right? There's, as PCBFA, you would understand this very well, but it's great to have those partners there and provide them with that advice so they can maximize their management of that area. So it's not just there's a crossing. There's an examination of how does this little piece of infrastructure fit into their whole farm or their whole management plan. How are they going to graze, move? Where are different? Well, yeah, we should get some cow person here to talk about this, but where are the beasts at any given time and what are they doing? And so part of that has often been accompanied by planting, or we do live staking, putting in willows on some of these crossings to I guess the ecological restoration and establish a riparian zone that helps with this flood and drought resiliency that we're really shooting for, and water quality improvement. So there's sort of it's more than just a crossing. I mean, that's the focus, but it's got to fit into a management plan, landscape, into the whole operation, right? So
it's a tool, not a solution necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's right. You can make a pitch for us now.
So for our listeners, if you are looking for some tools or some resources to help you manage your watershed a little bit better, the link to the MPWA website will be down in the description. Go check out their projects and their resources, check out their funders, that sort of stuff.
Maybe we would just list the partners if that's okay. I know sure. We mentioned already the funding was through Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program, but we've had Agroforestry, Woodlot and Extension Society, Alberta Conservation Association, the County of Grand Prairie Agricultural Services Board, cows and fish as well. So those are that's the group that's been doing these crossings, and big shout out to all of them.
Right, yeah, and we can, we'll drop the links to some of those associations and groups in the description as well if you want to check them out. Definitely do so. There's lots of resources out there if you're interested in doing some watershed work or learning more about grazing in riparian areas and that sort of stuff. So, on that note, thank you everybody for listening, and we will talk to you next time. Peace Country Beef and Forage Association is a research and extension group based out of Fairview, Alberta. Our mission is to help producers thrive in an agricultural system that is profitable, regenerative, and attractive to future generations. To learn more about what we do and see the results of our research trials or our archive of newsletters and fact sheets, check out our website at peacecountrybeef.ca. Want to get in touch? Have a burning question or a topic suggestion? Send us a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Thanks for listening.